of Magic's, in my mind, one of American Magic's most underrated scenes. A lot of quality players, a lot of good local scenes.
He's part of the Jupiter Games scene, I believe, kind of one of the early legacy scenes in the Northeast. So James is on the play, starts out with just a fetch land. Rill doing the same.
Keep in mind, Eric is playing 4 main deck copies of Stifle, so there may be some jockeying over fetch land operations in this matchup.
Yeah, James hesitant to crack a fetch land here. Interestingly, James also, he didn't crack a fetch land turn 1 either. And I think Eric wants to set up that Stifle. Yeah, he's going to go ahead and ponder, and James will take the opportunity. Can he get around Stifle? He can. Looks like Bayou or Underground Sea off this. Remember, no basics in either deck here.
And it's very important for James to get, think very hard about the lands that he's getting here, because his deck is very colored mana sensitive. I mean, there's double mana spells, and often he's going to try to chain together multiple either blue or black spells in the same turn. Him to Torak is in his list, so these fetches are more complicated than they would appear on the surface.
As you see there, does get both Bayou and Tropical Island. Now he'll let Ponder resolve.
And this is some of the pretty standard jockeying that you see in games of Legacy once people are showing blue fetch lands, of trying to be cautious about potential stifles, trying to represent stifle yourself.
Yep. On Eric's side, so looking at the top 3, generally I think that this matchup where no one makes a permanent in the first 2 turns favors James. Eric's deck is more equipped to play a tempo game and less equipped to go late. Certainly just trading land drops back and forth is something that James will be able to use to his advantage more.
Yeah, way more power in James's deck. Liliana the Veil, Jace the Mind Sculptor. He has Abrupt Decays to answer Eric's threats. There's no real analog in Eric's list to that, so a game like this, the pacing definitely favors James.
And Ponder resolves. James, with his 3rd land, may make his first spell. We'll see what that is here. And it's going to be just a Tarmogoyf, leaving 1 mana up, presumably playing around Daze.
Now, there are 2 copies of Spell Snare in Eric's list. Not a card that sees a lot of Legacy play, but very well served for fighting over Tarmogoyf.
So right now, Tarmogoyf, a 2/3 land and sorcery are in the graveyards. Looks like this is going to resolve. Maybe Eric's contemplating a Force of Will.
And you can see the issue with Force of Will in these fair matchups. It's not like this Tarmogoyf is a critical piece of anything that James is up to right now, but it is 2 cards out of Eric, and this is all part of James's plan of running Eric out of resources and eventually killing him almost arbitrarily. Nearly anything will do once he's able to start resolving some of his more expensive control cards.
Yeah, Eric does force it. He pitches Daze. Daze it's not entirely certain that Daze is a card anymore in this game, so I think that makes Eric less hesitant to pitch it.
Well, James going turn 2, land pass, turn 3, Tarmogoyf with the mana up, shows, if nothing else, James is showing a lot of respect for the possibility of Daze. And once your opponent's willing to take some turns off to play around it, you might as well pitch it to Force of Will.
And we see Eric trying to keep James down on mana. He does have a wasteland for the turn, selecting a target. James has 1 of each dual land, so Eric cannot take him off any color.
But these decks are usually pretty flush with double black spells, whether it be Liliana the Veil, Him to Torak, or what have you. So it makes sense to attack black mana, assuming there's no real hole you can open up.
Yeah, and more importantly, Eric finally does get a threat on the board. After the Wasteland, he makes Delver of Secrets, still leaving that fetch land up. James will try for Baleful Strix. This is before making a land drop, so maybe he doesn't have the land drop. Maybe he's disguising it. It's hard to say. Does draw a card. And does not have the land.
But still, these are good exchanges for James. Anytime he gets to trade Baleful Strix for a card, or at least cause Eric to pump the brakes, that's just all part of the plan of running Eric out of action.
Yeah, and so it looks like that Daze turned out to not be a dead card after all. We see after the Wasteland worked, James didn't have a replacement land. Eric probably would have been able to realize a full card off the Daze.
A great trade for James there, being able to trade his Baleful Strix for a Delver of Secrets.
That's the second 2-for-1 James has gotten this game. First one being Force of Will. And that's kind of the MO for Shardless Bug. It's going to continue to make these 2-for-1 plays until Eric runs out of cards.
Yeah, Eric's game plan for the matchup is much more about get out in front and start wastelanding and stifling to keep James off of his mana. When James is able to cast his spells, especially at a high life total, he's just, you know, pound for pound doing much better stuff than Eric is.
And that's been the difficulty for James here, is that, or for Eric at least, he's had trouble getting out in front. Here, this Tarmogoyf is the first real chance he's had at making a threat that James doesn't have an answer to. We see 4/5. There's instant sorcery, creature, land, and actually artifact, so it's 5/6. James will respond with his own Tarmogoyf. One thing we talked, the Jasarla's Bug, kind of the child of Jerry Thompson from a little more than a year ago. The use of Wasteland in the deck is really interesting. There's only 2 Wasteland in the deck, and I remember Jerry saying about the deck that commonly people play Wasteland in Charlotte's Bug too much like it's a Rug Delver Wasteland where they just go at people's lands. Whereas usually you don't want to waste people from the deck because Charlotte's Bug uses its mana so much better than the other decks in Legacy. It's there to deal with problematic lands like Grove of the Burn Willows or Caracas.
It's 3 or 4, you know, the deck's trying to get to 3 or 4 mana, so that changes the frame of reference a little bit here. So Wasteland isn't, like you said, about tempoing someone out necessarily, but rather either cutting off of colors in situations where your opponents are exposed or handling some of the cards you just mentioned.
Well, Eric is getting out in front at last now with another Wasteland draw. He's going to waste James down to 2 lands. Remember, none of those lands are black. So cards like Liliana of the Veil that are in James's hand are getting very dead right now, as Eric has a pair of Tarmogoyfs looking across from James's single Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, that turn there of Wasteland and a second Tarmogoyf, about as bad for James as it gets here.
Yeah, fortunately for James, he had a pretty good response. He had another Tarmogoyf of his own and drew a 3rd land. So it's 2 Tarmogoyfs versus 2 Tarmogoyfs and a Delver. The big difference is Eric has 1 card in hand, is up a Delver, whereas James has, well, 3 cards in hand and has an Ancestral Visions ticking down.
Well, there's not a lot of attacking to be done here in that, yeah, as you mentioned, that Ancestral Visions is a time bomb waiting to go off here.
Yeah, Wasteland number 3 for Eric Rill takes James once again off black mana. But Charlotte's Bug finding more lands, a fetch land drawn for James.
And that's a huge swing here. You know, Eric is close to just getting out resourced in this game. He still has some puncher's chance of keeping his head above water as long as James can't cast his spells, but that fetch land there means that James' hand is unlocked.
Yeah, and we see he casts Starless Agent. It's going to cascade into a 3rd Tarmogoyf. That's 2-for-1 number 3 from James this game. Mm-hmm. And speaking of 2-for-1s, in about 2 turns, James is going to get, well, one of the cleanest 3-for-1s out there.
Yeah. Now, that said, there's still no answer in James's hand to this Delver of Secrets. If it flips into Insectile Aberration, there is an outside shot of Eric being able to win this game still, but it has to flip real soon.
Yeah, right now Eric's still unable to do any damage. Tarmogoyfs, when you have a war of multiple Tarmogoyfs, they're much better at blocking than they are at attacking. And another Charlotte's Agent. This is 2-for-1 number 4 for James, and it's going to cascade into Ancestral Visions, so that's more of a 4-for-1.
No, just a 2-for-1.
Just a 2-for-1. Back down to Spell Pierce, just 2-for-1. But that still is 4 2-for-1s for James. And you just see Charlotte's Bug at work here.
Yeah.
Nimble Mongoose for Eric. And it's Ancestral Visions during the upkeep for James. A 3-for-1. Draws another Ancestral Visions, an Abrupt Decay, a land, a Hymn to Turok. 2-for-1. I think we're at number 5 now.
Yeah. And Abrupt Decay is the real critical piece of all this. Is again, the one major concern for James was this Delver flipping and becoming unanswerable.
James is going to go ahead and Thoughtseize. He will see that Eric is sitting on nothing but a Scalding Tarn. And that's a show of strength for James. He's willing to just cast a Thoughtseize here.
Yeah. He's far enough ahead that he just wants to know what's up.
He makes Deathrite Shaman, and now he feels far enough ahead on the board that he is going to use the Wasteland to take Eric off of green mana. And still no flips for Delver. No attacks for Eric. And Deathrite on James' side of the board. More mana, more resources.
And allowing him to claw back up with his life total here a little bit too. And now another Abrupt Decay for James. Now it's just an issue of deploying the resources efficiently.
Yeah, he's a little light on lands, but that should be just fine. He is so far ahead on the board. So he'll suspend another Ancestral Visions. Using cards to draw more cards.
He's probably close to being able to start to attack here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is he can just wait if he wants to. We see Lightning Bolt flipped for Eric, so that'll put James down to 7. There's not much life gain in Shardless Bug. That's one weakness the deck does have.
It is, yeah, basically just the Deathrite Shaman.
Right.
But that's not a bad source of life gain here.
It's repeatable, so it actually has potential to gain a lot. See, there's with that flyer. Eric's going to try to push damage, but pretty sure that the Insectile Aberration will abruptly become decayed.
Yeah, James has the ground completely locked up, so it's just an issue of can Eric fly over? And I think that this Insectile Aberration is worth an Abrupt Decay at this stage.
Absolutely. And it gets hit by the Abrupt Decay. James using the Deathrite to take a land out of Eric's yard. Eric's still at threshold. And then some. So the Mongoose is a 3/3. But James just protecting his life total, still at 10. More cards coming, more life points coming from Deathrite. Just grinding Eric on every front. And I actually like the play by Eric there. He Lightning Bolts Deathrite Shaman. The one thing James doesn't have right now is he only has so much life gain, so Eric's taking James off his life gain there.
Yeah, and mana is an issue too. This could lead Eric to a spot where he draws a Wasteland, and suddenly James may struggle to cast his spells.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm wondering, so James has the option between suspending yet another Ancestral Visions or casting Abrupt Decay. That's the last Visions in his deck. He's already resolved one, got one countered when he cascaded into it.
He also has the option here of Abrupt Decaying a Tarmogoyf and starting to go on the offensive here.
Absolutely. We'll see which way he decides to go with it. You know, it's tempting with a deck that's so good at grinding to just grind your opponent down to nothing. But as you suggested, yeah, maybe he does want to turn a corner at some point and start being aggressive.
Another Wasteland could complicate matters. That's the one thing in all of this.
So rather than going for the Visions, James opts to leave up Abrupt Decay, just as they catch all here. And Eric draws a card, passes back. Looks like we have a little bit of a standoff while James waits for his Ancestral Visions. He draws a Jace the Mind Sculptor. And Eric, patient, he'd drawn a Brainstorm a couple turns ago, waits until he has a fetch land, and now he's going to go ahead and Brainstorm with fetch up.
Yeah, neither of these players are really up to anything proactive, so he can wait to assemble a better hand.
Yep, no pass the turn. Ancestral Vision's down to 1. More cards coming James's way. Not more lands yet, though. He draws a Deathrite for the turn. So a delayed land, if you would. And yeah, he'll go ahead and suspend the 4th Ancestral Visions now. Eric's going to shuffle away. So that is one of those situations where Brainstorm really did turn into basically an Ancestral Visions for Eric.
Yeah, but Eric's a little bit behind on the Ancestral Recall race at this stage of the game.
Yeah, he's
James is up quite a few Ancestrals on him.
Not to mention when the cards James is drawing are much higher impact than Eric's.
Yeah. Spell Pierces and Dazes and such against removal and Planeswalkers and so forth. So it looks like Stifle's going to be fighting over this Ancestral.
Yeah, so with how Suspend works, there is a trigger that removes the last counter and says that you may now cast this spell. So a Stifle can, and in this case did, stop an Ancestral from resolving, in a sense. It didn't counter the spell, it countered the trigger that the last removal of time counter caused. All right. And James, with the help of Deathrite Shaman, makes Liliana of the Veil. Here's yet another 2-for-1, or possible 2-for-1 here. He's going to go ahead and Edict Eric, taking care of Nimble Mongoose. Yeah,
and James just with a full stranglehold on this game.
Yeah, he's going for like to fully grind his opponent down to nothing plan.
Yeah.
He's going to 2-for-1 Eric until Eric actually has nothing. And at 10 life, he has the luxury to do that. Liliana pluses. James will get rid of his own Hymn to Turok, a Scalding Tarn for Eric. We see James has drawn his 2nd Wasteland. That's both of the 2 Wastelands in his deck.
And with the ability to gain life with the Deathrite Shaman as well. Just another insurance policy that James has.
Deathrite will go ahead and make colored mana. James is going to tap 4, and this is for Jace the Mind Sculptor. I imagine he'll just plus. Now he's gonna go, okay, he's gonna brainstorm. Sure, but just more cards. That's yet another 2 for 1.
Yeah.
We're at number 7.
That's the theme of the deck here, so.
Yep.
Gotta just keep the 2 for 1s rolling.
At what count? So we're like I said, right? I've been counting the number of 2 for 1s. What number? What's the magic number you think? How many 2 for 1s until the game is until you're done?
I think that we've hit the double-digit mark at this point. I have to imagine.
I mean, like from a competitive standpoint, like how many? I've always said like a rev for 6 feels like winning. How many? At what point? How many 2 for 1s does it take for you to basically just feel like you've won the game? It's like 3, 4.
In Legacy, it can be obfuscated a little bit because decks can win from out of nowhere.
Sure.
But this feels like one of the spots where 3 or 4 should get it done, unless Eric is able to cut off James. Now, there was a couple harrowing turns here where, James could not cast his spells and he needed to draw some timely lands to be able to unlock his hand. But now we reached the point where just too much damage has been done.
The 4th Ancestral Vision's about to come off. Yeah, James is plus something like 9 or 10 cards. Wastes Eric back off green. And this game, more of a formality here. I don't think Eric has any way to get back into it. He's having to use his lightning bolts to take care of problematic permanents, which means they aren't going upstairs, which means he's not burning James out. James has too much life gain, too many problematic permanents. He certainly isn't attacking James, even though Eric has his best creatures in play. So if he can't burn him, he can't attack him, he can't outdraw him, there's not really a line that Eric can take. So 3 Tarmogoyfs versus 3 Tarmogoyfs.
Is it finally time for James to go on the offensive?
Well, he 2 for 1'd himself there, actually.
Yeah,
he undid one of them.
He is down quite a few cards after that sequence.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, he'll get to recoup them here. Upkeep, he's going to Ancestral. No, he's not going to get to cast the last Ancestral. Eric's going to scoop before that happens.
No, he will not give him the pleasure. No more 3 cards.
Any game where you get to cast an Ancestral Visions 4 times, it's a good game.
Yeah, if you have the time to do it and the cards you're drawing matter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's good.
Great.
So James up a game here. Pretty commanding, and again, a lot of it just comes down to the start of the game there. Eric not doing anything for the first couple turns, allowing James to make his first couple of land drops untouched. And even though Eric stunted his development a little bit with some wastelands in some of those middle turns, by the time it got to the point where James was casting stuff at a high love total, there's not much for Eric to do there. So sideboard maybe will improve this for Eric. 2 copies of Spell Pierce, a Sylvan Library, a Life from the Loam, an Ancient Grudge, a Crow's Hand Grip, 2 Rough Tupples, 2 Grim Lavamancers, 2 Pyroblast, 2 Flusterstorms, and a Dismember. I like the Dismember in this matchup, more removal for Tarmogoyf, which is an issue that Eric has. The 2 copies of Grim Lavamancer are good here, and I think the Sylvan Library will come in because it's a slower matchup, and the Life from the Loam here gives Eric the possibility of Loam alongside Wasteland locking James out of the game.
Yeah, I was going to say Life from the Loam is one of the great tools that the Drug Delver has against these bug control style decks. All the way from, Team America, Shardless Bug, straight bug control. It gives them the option to just recur Wastelands. Most bug decks are fairly soft to Wasteland and lets him continue his mana denial strategy through the late game. And
Eric cannot win pound for pound. He's going to have to cheat this game essentially by keeping James off of this stuff. So Life from the Loam, very valuable in that sort of game plan. It's 1 card, but if it shows up at some point in the game alongside Wasteland and Eric isn't being buried by card advantage, he can just lock James out of the game altogether.
Right, and that's one of the things that we'd said earlier. I think I mentioned around turn 2, where I said, if both these players are just playing land go up until turn 3, that is the wrong game for Eric to be playing.
Yeah.
And like you said there, he can't go pound for pound in this matchup. He needs to tempo. He needs that kind of advantage. On James' side in the sideboard, he has a lot of ways to help negate Eric's early threats. What he needs is cheaper things for the most part. The games where he gets to have all his lands, he'll probably win with the cards in his main deck. So when we look at the cheap options he has 2 Disfigure and take out an early Delver. I'm not sure, it's narrow, but he could use those. He has 2 Nile Spell Bombs. Those are actually pretty decent against both Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose to help just keep them under control. Also, it costs 1. A Baleful Strix, it's a cheap spell that's another 2-for-1. It helps with Tarmogoyfs and flipped Insectile Aberrations. I imagine he'll board up to the third one of that.
Yeah, for sure. Just more cheap action and then more 2-for-1s is kind of what he's looking for here. I wouldn't be surprised if he got away from the Thoughtseize in this matchup. Rug Delver is really redundant. His life total is under some pressure. The Force of Wills are not ideal here either. So I think James is going to become more of just a board control deck and get away from some of his 1-for-1 and 1-for-2 reactive cards.
Yeah, he has a Hymn to Turok in the main. I imagine that will come out as well. Against a deck that's puts so much pressure on the board as Rug Delver does, you probably cannot afford to be casting anything on 2 mana that doesn't impact the board, even a card as good as Hymn to Turok.
Correct. It's not that kind of matchup. And it says a lot to the overall power level of Legacy that a card like Hymn to Turok is still contextual in matchups.
Right,
if it
you don't just play it.
If it was legal and standard, it would be by a mile the best thing to be doing. And in Legacy, there's one copy in James's list that gets sideboarded out a fair bit.
So do you think Mono Black Control would play Hymn to Turok?
Probably would find room for it, yeah.
Gross.
I would imagine.
Now you got me thinking about if Hymn was in standard, because like Mono Black's already pretty good. Now if they're like, oh yeah, Thoughtseize, then Hymn you, then Underworld Connections. Oh, that'd be great.
The deck would be substantially better with Hymn to Turok, I believe. You'd find room for it.
Be really fun. I think you'd play the Mono Black build more.
Probably, yeah.
Because you'd really just want to Hymn him on turn 2.
The mana base, cut Mutavault, mana base is just 26 swamps. Just go to work on them.
Ugh. When Mono Black Control is one of those decks which, okay, before this year, it was kind of my ongoing joke that every time a new set came out, there was a lot of people got really excited about Mono Black. You know, you'd see a card with a lot of black mana symbols, they'd be like, oh man, Phyrexian Obliterator, Mono Black's back.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh man, Geralf Messenger, this time Mono Black's back.
Geralf Messenger showed up in standard. It was a good card. Showed up in some decks.
You know, they're like, oh man, Mutilate. Hey, guess what? It's going to be Mono Black time. And I'll be like, this is the first time in standard that, I wouldn't say since Cabal Coffers that, yeah, actually Mono Black is back this time, you know.
Well, it's actually Thoughtseize is back, and there happens to be some halfway decent cards you can put around it. That's really what's going on.
And as far as Mono Black is sweet when it's around, but when Mono Black's the best deck in a format, that's not always that much fun. Mono Black's a jerk.
It's most things in life, the fun is on diminishing returns, and Magic is no different.
Yeah. Oh, you know, the general game plan of Mono Black, though being really sweet, is being on the other side of it is miserable.
Yep. The first time you ride a roller coaster in a day, that can be really sweet. The 25th time you ride a roller coaster in a day, it's probably less fun.
Yeah.
It's getting less fun. Most things in life are like that.
All right, Eric on the play this game. We'll see if he can use that to his advantage to keep James off resources. Turn 1, he has a fetch land, but has no 1-drop, no Ponder or Delver. James with the tap land ships the turn. He does have a Abrupt Decay to help deal with whatever Eric's early threat is. Well, provided it's not a Nimble Mongoose. We'll see what it is, though. Eric plays Volcanic Island, cracks his fetch land for a Tropical Island.
And Eric elected not to cast the Nimble Mongoose on the first turn of the game. Have to imagine this means that he has Stifle at the ready and wants to try to tag one of James's fetch lands. Not surprising game plan here, since Eric has to play some sort of mana denial game.
It is Nimble Mongoose, and you see James has boarded in some of his cheaper spells. Hiding out in his hand is a Disfigure alongside Abrupt Decay. And he's going to play Nile Spellbomb here. That'll help keep the Nimble Mongoose to a reasonable 1-1.
And all of these cards that are cheap, that provide some defense for James, even though Nile Spellbomb looks pretty innocuous, they're all part of the plan of him just not getting run out of the gym. That's all he needs to do to allow himself to make his land drops and eventually deploy his 3 and 4 mana spells. And
this is actually something an angle that a lot of decks attack Rug Delver from. If you look at a deck like Shardless Bug or Miracles or even Stoneblade, you know, they count on 1 and 2 mana removal to hurt Rug Delver. The fact that Rug Delver only plays 12 creatures and to basically bridge the way to the late game and get out from under the tempo hold of Rug and then basically win the late game with their superior cards.
Yeah, and once, you stymie the early offense, Rug Delver is a very beatable deck, in part because there's not that many creatures, and also in part because there's so many Spell-Pierced Daze type of draws the deck has. It does draw pretty poorly as it enters the mid-game.
We'll see what James can put together. A Ponder on turn 3. Here's how he starts the turn. He's going to need another threat. And I think this is where one of the difficulties is. His Nimble Mongoose is being kept to 1/1 by the Spell Bomb. If he plays a Delver, it's going to get disfigured. If he plays a Tarmogoyf, it'll get Abrupt Decayed. He just isn't going to be able to stick many damage sources.
Yeah. So he might be entering the stage of the game where it's just Wasteland and cross the fingers.
Yeah, so instead, if he can't get an early threat, what he can do is he can waste and stifle James out of the game. And I don't know, it looks like James floated a black mana in response to the Wasteland.
Yeah.
So he's going to go ahead and use Nile Spellbomb to get Eric's graveyard. And I don't know, yeah. And with the trigger, he's wanting to draw a card off it. We'll see whether or not that gets stifled. There's some judge ruling going on here. There's a lot of different triggers you could stifle. You could stifle the activated ability. You could stifle the triggered ability of drawing a card. You can't.
Imagine if Eric's fighting here is over his graveyard getting exiled.
Yeah.
I don't think he cares that much about James drawing a card here.
You can't let James pay the black mana and then not get the card. That's the one thing that doesn't work. So it looks like he'll exile it, draw the card, and we'll be back on James's turn 3. And he does have another land in hand. It is his only land, however. He has a Polluted Delta, and that's it. So he's going to start with a Brainstorm, see if he can maybe bait out his Spell Pierce.
And he has to be suspicious of Stifle now in Eric's hand, given how long he paused on that Nile Spellbomb. So you see James with a Polluted Delta in hand. He had the option of just sacrifice my Polluted Delta, go get a land, and try to cast Tarmogoyf this turn, but I think he correctly identifies that Eric has Stifle.
And that is a great response for Eric. It wasn't a Spell Pierce, it was a Daze on the Brainstorm, because James didn't play the fetch land, he wasn't able to pay for Daze, and now he can't crack the fetch land when he wants to. He's going to go do it on Eric's turn, but it gets stifled.
Yeah, the reason to do it on Eric's upkeep there is it forces him to use the mana on his own turn.
Yeah. Eric is successfully executing the mana denial plan. James right now has no lands in hand, has no more cantrips outside of a Nile Spellbomb. Looks like he did draw a land for the turn, and it really is only going to take him getting up to 3 to get out from under this lock.
Yeah.
He's going to fetch here, and that one does work. No second stifle for Eric.
And James can breathe a sigh of relief here. Once he's able to make his land drops, he's still working with a lot of life. He's at 16. Nimble Mongoose is not close to getting the threshold here.
Right, there was no good clock from Eric. And I think that you might just see James, he has another Nile Spellbomb in hand. He may just play it and leave black up just to cycle it to continue hitting land drops. He's going to go for Tarmogoyf on the turn instead to actually just stop the damage completely.
Yeah, I like it. It forces Eric to have Force of Will or a second copy of Daze, both of which are pretty unlikely at this spot. And because James is facing a deck with Wasteland in it, he can't just assume he's going to go to next turn with his mana. So it's a calculated risk, but with one Daze already gone, it feels safe to assume that your Tarmogoyf is going to resolve, or at least that there's a low chance there's a second Daze in Eric's hand. And James picks his spot, and now it's in play, and this is a problematic permanent for Eric. Not really flush with ways to kill this thing. He's got one Dismember in his sideboard, and otherwise he's looking at 2-for-1s or just trying to work around it.
He could Spell Snare it if it's still on the stack right now. If Andy had one. He's fetching right now, and yeah, he is going to Dismember it. And I believe he may have a Spell Snare in hand as well, but he's just using his cards more efficiently. Dismember is less flexible of a card.
Yeah. Spell Snare could be used on a Baleful Strix, for example, more profitably than a Dismember would be used.
Yeah, Dismember deals 4 to Eric, so he's down to 14, but a good catch-all there. And Eric's up to 4 cards in his graveyard. Mongoose still a 1/1 though. Tarmogoyf added to the board for Eric. And here's where James will start being put to the test. We did say he does have great removal for Goyfs and Delvers. And he has a decision. He can Abrupt Decay. He drew Baleful Strix for the turn. He can go for that as well.
Yeah, it's tough because he has a lot of great removal, but it does have to line up the right way.
I almost feel like he wants to Abrupt Decay just because the penalty for going for Strix and missing is pretty big, whereas Abrupt Decay has very little penalty for going for it.
Yeah.
I think the biggest danger is it brings Rill closer to threshold. We see a Brainstorm for Eric Rill. That's card number 5 in the graveyard.
And Eric found a lot of gas off of that. It's all spells, including Force of Will and Lightning Bolt.
And how much, say that James goes for an Abrupt Decay here, do you think we see just a Lightning Bolt to the face to give Nimble Mongoose threshold?
Assuming Eric has nothing else to do with his mana, then yes. It's just a big swing. It's a lot of damage. And again, you can't fight fair against Shardless Bug if you're Rogue Delver. You just gotta get in your spots when you can, deal as much damage as possible, and try to close the game out before they're able to deploy their more powerful stuff.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put 2 back off Brainstorm. Just had 5 cards in the yard. Going to attacks, this is a 4/5 Goyf and a 1/1 Mongoose. And the Abrupt Decay will come out from James. That's gonna hit Tarmogoyf. Card number 6 in the yard for Eric. And now we will see what he goes for. It looks like Eric also, he also drew a Stifle there. And is he going to, he looks like he's gonna go put that 7th card in. And no, he's actually just gonna deal 1, play Delver of Secrets, leave up Stifle.
Yeah.
Land 3 for James, that's the money one.
It's a very greedy play there by Eric. I mean, he had the option of just bolting and getting the threshold that turn, deploying the Delver of Secrets. Hopefully, he was hoping to be able to catch James off guard here, maybe stifle some sort of fetch land, but now things are getting a lot worse for Eric. He can't get the threshold this turn, and things are likely to get worse.
He starts with Nile Spellbomb. He has Nile Spellbomb and Disfigure. He wants to do both this turn. He was deciding how best to play around Spell Pierce. And then he's going to pass so that if Eric pierces, it will be on Eric's turn. Force of Will flips Delver. He may Disfigure before Eric has a chance to draw the Force of Will.
Yeah, keep in mind we're still in the upkeep during all of this reveal, so that Force of Will is not in Eric's hand.
Yeah, there's a window between the reveal and actually getting the card that Delver reveals. So he gets Disfigured, then Eric draws a Force of Will. And thanks to Nile Spellbomb, this Mongoose that just became a 3/3 is all the way back to a 1/1.
And Eric can go ahead and use a Stifle here, but you can feel the game slipping away from him. Just James's raw resource advantage here is going to be hard to overcome unless he randomly just can't find an answer to this Nimble Mongoose.
And he has to Stifle here. It's his only threat. He really needs to protect it. James goes on to 11, but as we know, there's a Liliana of the Veil hanging out in James's hand. Eric's hand is Force of Will, Lightning Bolt. It has no answer to Liliana. Not to mention that I think James has Force plus blue card.
Yeah, he's just picked up Force of Will this turn.
So he's got to feel real confident with where this game's gotten to. So now he has an answer to all of Eric's creatures. Liliana. Well, his card was he shuffled away the Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
Force of Will pitching Spell Snare. And James is going to force back.
No, I think that Force of Will is the next draw step.
What was?
I think he set back Force of Will, Lightning Bolt on that Brainstorm a few turns back, so I think Bolt will be the
Bolt's
draw.
the next draw.
But that's not great for Eric here. I mean, he can kill the Liliana, but the damage has already been done.
Yep, she's down to 1. He'll kill her. He'll wait until James pluses the Liliana and then do it so that he gets a card out of James.
Right.
But you're right. Looks like the one card that James has kept is, well, starting on the 2/1 train, I believe it's Shardless Agent. She's going to plus it in response. Eric's going to bolt the Liliana. So a 2-for-1 for Eric. Eric down to 0 cards, James down to 1 card, but it's Shardless Agent.
And here it goes.
And a little bit of a reprieve for Eric. It found Abrupt Decay, so one of the cascades that's not as strong for the deck.
Eric still needs to find a threat card pretty fast here.
Yeah, James's entire deck's full of 2-for-1s, so James will continue to grind. As you see that Baleful Strix.
That's a great draw here for James, as it's a preemptive answer to some threat card Eric may find down the line.
Eric stifles the card draw off Baleful Strix.
But Baleful Strix still has a huge presence in play.
Draw from Eric. And you're right, the thing is, Baleful Strix will trade with any of Eric's threats.
Yeah.
Eric down to 8. And this looks like it is going James's way. He finally navigated the mana denial plan and was able to end up on top, really with just a couple of creatures, but that's all that's needed. Another Baleful Strix added to the board. And fast. A reasonable clock for James should seal this in. Eric's down to 5.
Yeah, not a lot to get out of this. Eric just still has a copy of Ancient Grudge in his list. If he brought it in to fight these artifact creatures, maybe that gives him a reprieve, but he's in a lot of trouble.
Gonna go ahead and shuffle off Ponder, not finding what he needed to yet.
I feel like James did a great job of just navigating this game, taking some lumps, but slowly making inroads on Eric's ability to deal damage, not running his stuff needlessly into counter spells, and just slowly leveraging his advantages.
Draw there for Eric. He hits a Wasteland, but the threats are already on the board. And he'll play a Tarmogoyf. And opts to waste James off of a tropical island, but James has an uncracked fetch land. His hand, not much help. It looks like some lands in a Toxic Deluge.
Yep, James is flooding out a little bit here.
And he has slowed down the clock. He swings 1 Baleful Strix. That puts Eric down to 4. The idea is that he wants to trade another Baleful with... He wants to keep a Baleful Strix back to trade with Tarmogoyf, and he can't swing Shardless Agent.
Right.
We may see both Strixes swing this turn as it's a 2-turn clock. James's hand is all lands, but he's going to go ahead and put Eric down to 2. All lands in a Deluge.
Yep. He can go ahead and hit with both of these Strixes, and even if Eric finds an answer to a Strix, it's still fine. And there it is.
All right, so James Rynkiewicz, 2-0, takes out Eric Rill. He moves to 7-0. That is 1 match away from the top 8. Eric Rill, meanwhile, trying this weekend to make up the ground he lost to Chris Van Meter in the Standard. He's at 6-1, but with probably just 2 more wins, should be able to still make it into the top 8.
Made his best effort in those games to try to execute his game plan. Knew that his really only way to win was to keep James off of casting his spells. But James was mindful enough of the possibility of cards like Stifle